Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on something. In this case, the Ladies' Empire, I think, because it doesn't have a name. What I mean is, let's talk about Shadows Linger, Volume 2 or Book 2 in the Chronicles of the Black Company that I've been rereading at the moment. To be fair, I kind of finished it a while ago, but then life happened and I first had to read The God Is Not Willing, and then I had to celebrate my birthday until frat boys called the cops on us. And what's wrong with the youth of today? I thought frat boys were supposed to be annoying assholes. Now they're annoying assholes who complain about a bit of like heavy metal singing at 2 a.m. in the castle gardens. I don't know. Kids today, no stamina is what I'm saying. Anyway, complaining about the youth today is a good thing because we're talking about old people doing old people things, by which I mean being mercenaries and shit. So let's do this. Whoop. Cheers. All right. So, once again, this is a book that has been out for 35 years at this point. So I'll give like a quick introduction and then I'll go into like a full spoiler discussion because I don't believe there's that much to spoil. Also, I assume that you have read at least The Black Company when you're watching this, because this is like the second book, so why even bother? Anyway, let's talk about it. Shadows Linger takes place a bit after the events of the Black Company. The Black Company is still in service of the Lady, and is putting down rebels, or like what passes for rebels at that point. And at the meantime, something happens somewhere else in a city called Juniper, and most of the novel is set in Juniper. And we get something of a more urban spy fantasy novel in a way. So a bit of a shift for like Glen Cook's writing style, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this novel. And so yeah, that's sort of the really quick synopsis without any spoilers. I think that like with the shift in like narrative style and story and whatnot, people that had some issues with some of the stuff happening in the Black Company might actually enjoy this one a bit more because, as I said, it's a huge shift in like storytelling and even prose in parts, and I personally appreciate the fact because it shows that Glenn Cook is a more like varied writer than you might give him credit for. So that's sort of the first really important thing that I liked about it. Now, let's talk about the next thing that I personally appreciate. We have like basically two narratives going at the same time, and obviously at some point they kind of connect. That being the narrative of what happens in the city of Juniper, and one of the people that is like, it's sort of like mostly the perspective of someone called Marin Shed, who runs a bar there, a tavern in the poorest part of the city. And the other part is our usual Croker, the analyst, talking about what happens with the Black Company. And those, at some point, they obviously connect, and we get an explanation for why there is like a narrative from Sheb's not Shed, Marin Shed, why there is a narrative from Shed's point of view in the annals of the Black Company, because once again, this is still like the fiction, the metafiction there is that these are the annals of the Black Company as put down by Croker. So obviously we get the point that he actually talks to Marin Shed at some point and gets his story from his point of view. So there's that. And that is like the first part in which this like differs from the Black Company, where we mostly get just Croker in every like part that happens. The next bit is that what with most of the narrative being set in the city of Juniper, we get a bit more of like a setting details, a bit more setting details than before, although still not a lot. Like Glen Cook is still not the person who gives you tons of information about a city and names every town, like names every tree and dog or whatever. But we get a bit of a more like a an actual feel for how Juniper feels as a city. And it's one of the things that I personally really like about it is that Cook is really good at like evoking the feeling of a setting with very few descriptions, very few words, right? I mean, he still has a very sparse prose. He tends to use like almost your noir style like convoluted metaphors from time to time, but in general his prose is still like rather short sentences, like relatively easy to use words and stuff like that. It's his style. I appreciate it. I mean, this is still at least in the fiction told by a soldier who is not a poet or anything like that. So there's that. So we see the city of Juniper, which is by all appearances, a dump. It has a super rigid structure, a super rigid religious structure that holds back and holds down the entire city. We have a large, like, poor populace lorded over by some, like, rich nobility and stuff like that. And our main focus is that underbelly. Most of it takes place in that, like, poor quarter near the harbor. And this is the next thing that I really appreciate about Shadow's Linger is that Glen Cook is really good at showing us that underbelly of society, those poor people, and the desperation they are driven to through, like, economic pressure and poverty mostly, and the hopelessness of like not having any chance to make it out of there with like having almost no money, being in debt, being lorded over by different like crime lords, the whole 9 yards. And I feel like for the time it was written, he does that in a really impressive way because what he shows us is like how fairly decent human beings are pushed to do extreme things through economic pressure and the lack of any other way to get out of that economic pressure, because that's sort of like the thing that we always get told. It's like you work hard, you work hard, and you're focused, you can make it out there, economic success is possible, and so forth. The lie of capitalism, the American lie of capitalism, I would say. And Glen Cook is very, very honest in showing that that's totally not the case. No, you have to game the system, you have to work around the system, you have to be a criminal if you want to make it out of the dumps, because that's how the system is rigged. You can't make it out there in like an honest way. And I appreciate the fact that he is so like open and honest about it. And while people in that situation do horrible things, like you know um uh, you know human sacrifice basically, almost, or at least like murder and stuff like that, there's like very, when you look at it, they have like few options to do things in a different way. And that's something that, like, with the character of Marin Shed, I really appreciated what a kind of complex character he is. And through the story we can see like what happens to people that are fundamentally meek and aimless in a way. If you push them too hard and force them too hard, and how that can in the end, if you put people up against the wall, they might just fight back, which is obviously something that we see in other novels, like especially with the Malazan stuff. Like, humans are able to do extraordinary things if we get pushed too hard. And on an individual level, we see that with Marin Shed in Shadow's Linger. So I really, really appreciated that part of it a lot. The next bit, and this is like, I spoke about that when I spoke about the Black Company itself, right? The next thing we need to talk about is morality. Now, the Black Company, being, as we already established, being a mercenary company, is on the surface has no morals. They fight for whomsoever pays them. But we see throughout this book, at the beginning and so forth, how the morality is actually becoming something of a problem, because they are working for the sort of evil power, the evil overlord, overlady, the tyrant of the empire. Um, and we can see how being those people kind of nags at their conscience and frays at their personalities and frays at their nerves and like makes them less than they are before, which once again is an important thing to look at. Is like there is that idea that there is such a thing as basic human decency in a way. The Black Company, while always eschewing that, and Croker is the first one to point out, and Glen Cook is probably the second one there, are not nice people. They do a lot of stuff that is not nice. Um, but being like enforcers for the tyrant still kind of rankles. Now the other question there is there like that thing with all us humans that we really are rebels at heart? I feel there might be something to that. I've not explored that thought too much, but I feel like through our media, at least for the media, throughout the media of the last couple of, like, I don't know, 50 years or so, in a lot of ways, everyone tends to see themselves as the rebels fighting against some absolutist overlord, some overarching system or whatever. And that goes from like no matter which like political affiliation you have, it's like we always see ourselves as fighting against the machine, the man, those up there and whatnot. The idea that we as humans tend to prefer the side of the underdog, prefer the side of the rebel in a way. I don't know where it comes from, but it certainly is something that seems to be ingrained in our personalities, at least in the West for the last couple of decades at least. So the question then is, what happens if we, by definition, are not those people and there's no way for us to actually, you know, pretend otherwise? I mean that's like the point. Is like if you are like a conservative white heterosexual in the West these days, you are by definition not a rebel. That's just not how the system works. No matter what your right wing media tells you, you're not rebels. You're anything but. But the point is, like, it is still possible in such a situation to pretend that you are the rebels standing for the true cause, fighting against the dark overlords from socialist, I don't know, whatever. But it's still possible in that moment where you are by definition the enforcers of the powers. Like, how can you still, like, how does that actually work on your psyche? And we see that with the Black Company, this like really hurts their morals and the morale basically. And yeah. And the second bit, in the interesting thing there is, once again, is like stories of rebellion are much easier to tell, have higher stakes by definition in a way. They are more thrilling, more interesting, and so forth. So Glen Cook, as a writer, also faces that problem. It's like how to tell that story, how to make clear that, like, how to make the enforcers for the power, how to make those people be interesting and fascinating. And he solves that problem obviously by having the Taken doing their like Taken thing on the one hand. So there's intrigue above, like treachery within the machine that the Black Company is fighting against in a way, or trying to save themselves from. And then obviously he puts on the table the Dominator, who is And I love the fact that we have all these like people, and the overlords are called the Dominator, and the Lady is like no dumb names and everything. I mean, they show up later on, but it's like mostly it's like they're just titles. What else do you need? Like if you have an evil overlord, why not be honest and say just call him like Dominator? It makes sense. I like it. Anyway, so we have that, plus we have the idea that there is the rebel with Darling being now sort of, at least Croker knows that she seems to be the White Rose, whatever that means, because I don't think that gets explained until book 3. Anyway, he already knows it, so there is a true rebellion, and the Black Company has some connection to it already. The other thing is that once we come to Juniper, once the Black Company comes to Juniper, there's also the fact that there is a ton of corruption in there, and the Black Company trying to do like good in a way, at least in a way, look into like all the corruption stuff like that, partly, which gives us another really fascinating thing, that we have a character like Bullock, who is not a nice person, but also on the right side, right? He's trying to protect things. He's trying to do his job. He has, as Croker tells us, because he comes from the Boskin, that like poor fit quarter where everything happens. He has that like story, he made it out there, but he's still looking out for the people there because he knows how it feels to be down on your luck. So he's an interesting character study in a way that I feel like the first book didn't give us that many like actual character studies. And Glenn Cook does a lot of good characterization in this second book. Once again, like Merenshed is an interesting character, Bullock is an interesting character, the people from the Black Company, not so much, actually. I don't know. But, and I think it's easy to overlook that because, like, once again, a lot of us, like, readers of modern fantasy, like, oh, the prose isn't like we're used to now. The world building isn't, like, that good or whatever. I think it's still good because it serves its purpose. But where Cook really shines is showing us the average person, the maybe lower than average person, and their motivations, which are mostly economic pressure. And yeah, to show us those aspects and the lengths that we humans are willing to go to better our position, to survive, or do something for a cause we really believe in, depending on what that is. And that may just be really awful things, as like handing over bodies to someone you clearly know is evil. So yeah, those are things that I really appreciate. Then yes, the setting. Juniper as a city, the more like urban cloak and dagger spy thing, with still the Black Company being the badasses that they are, is pretty cool. Another thing that I really appreciate and becomes even more like openly, like, I don't know, clear in this book compared to the Black Company, is that while the Black Company is a badass company of mercenaries and everyone is afraid of them, they themselves are absolutely scared by the Taken and those high powered mages. So we have that clear different power levels, and that in the end leads the Black Company to actually break contract and flee, which once again is an interesting thing to look at. We'll see more of that later. The question is like, how do you square that? Because we've heard before that the Black Company has never before broken contract. That's not what they do because they are mercenaries, and breaking contract is the worst thing you can do because it directly impacts your reputation and your you know your face, basically, which is the only thing that you have as a mercenary unit. Is like the trust, like you don't break contract. They flee before the Taken because they know the Taken are planning to take him out and so forth, and there's nothing they can do, so they just leave. And yes, as I said, like the idea of like, is that cowardice, is that survival instinct? How do you square those kind of things? How do you Yeah, how do you like square that with your inner morality, with your inner, like, with their self-esteem, with the image of self-worth or whatever you have for the entire company? How does that work? And Cook, like, is actually pretty open in, like, mentioning those questions, and, you know, at least putting all these moral questions on the table, which, once again, I really appreciate. I mean, the actual plot about the Dominator trying to break out and all of that is not really the most exciting thing about it. I feel like the main thing, and that's something that we'll see. I think we see a lot of in the first trilogy, the trilogy of the North, if you want. What we see a lot of in there is that Cook takes a very, very basic fantasy plot. It's like there's an evil overlord who tries to break out and so forth. He takes that structure and hangs on it a lot of, like, questions of moral, of good and evil, questions of morality, questions of what it means to be an average person in a dark world and so forth, and doesn't really even answer them, but just leaves them for the reader to figure out. Because that's the other thing, like, even though those stories are told from, like, a first person perspective most of the time, um, Croker doesn't have the answers. Glenn Cook doesn't have the answers. He just shows us all these problems that we as human beings tend to run into when we're trying to make our jobs, or do our jobs, and trying to survive in a way. And that's something that I really appreciated about this book. Like, the tighter focus on just one setting, not all that running around that we see in the first book. The focus on the economic pressures and the personal pressures and what they do to an individual, what they can do to an individual. Um, all of that makes Shadows Linger a really good book, and shows, as I said, another side of Glenn Cook's writing style, of Glenn Cook's abilities as a fantasy writer. And I feel that someone who has read The Black Company and didn't completely, utterly hate it because whatever, but, maybe just thought, like, the really loose world building wasn't exactly your thing. You felt lost with all these names and places that they just, like, run around between, or whatever. Give this one a shot. It certainly has a tighter focus. You don't have that much running around, and the character work is so much more fascinating, so much more intriguing than the first one, that I guess I would rate it higher than the first one if I had to rate anything, which I hopefully never will. Apart from that, it's a great book. More people should read more Black Company. It's a great series, as I've said before, and I really appreciate it. Rereading it for the fourth time now, I think. Yeah, so there's that. If you have read the book already, let's talk about it in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions and whatnot. And I'll see you tomorrow about something else, which might just be the White Rose, because I'm almost done with it. So until then, cheers.